Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cloud Migration Checklist, a better way to set priorities, assess your progress, and optimize performance. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Dennis Drogseth, VP of Research at Enterprise Management Associates, and Will Degener, Director of Product Management at Scalable Software. Dennis brings over 30 years of experience in various aspects of marketing and business planning for service management solutions. He supports EMA through leadership in business service management, CMDB systems, automation systems, and service-centric financial optimization. Will brings decades of experience across various aspects of enterprise software solution delivery, specifically in the ITSM and ITAM space. His roles have included consultancy, product management, and development. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I wanted the audience to know that Dennis and Will be concluding today's presentation by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback, a PDF of the speaker slides, and some additional resources on Scalable Software. So I do hope that you will check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Dennis Drogseth. Dennis?
Thank you so much, Raleigh. And thank you all for coming, or listening in anyway. As you can see, perhaps from this, it's a fairly rich presentation with a lot to cover. We're going to talk about that so-called journey to the cloud. What are the reasons and the challenges and the benefits? We'll spend some time there, and then we'll look at 3 key technology requirements to enable the migration, measure it, and take charge of it: discovery and inventory, dependency mapping, and then understanding costs. And then finally, we'll look at, again, leveraging a lot of research, which you'll see in the very next slide or two, process and organizational recommendations for going forward. And how do you validate migration success? So in this next slide, I want to just briefly mention the list here is primarily to say what you're going to see is data taken from a lot of different research projects, a lot of different perspectives. Cloud comes into just about everything we do in different ways. As you can see, whether it's DevOps, whether it's automation and IT service management, whether it's digital war rooms is another area, going on down the list, looking at user experience and also looking at research specifically about cloud and cloud optimization. A lot of it, by the way, was research involving optimizing IT for financial performance, which is very much a part of why and how you should plan your migration. This happens to be data from the very recent, extremely recent research in DevOps we've just done, with current data on how much number of production applications that are in-house developed, actually, running on workloads in the cloud. So this is a subset of all the other applications, but those that are in-house developed are running in production 45.15%, and we're going to see a 10% increase based on the data year to year. It's continuing to grow. You can see a substantial number, even looking at more than 50% as well. And that would include internally hosted virtual application, externally hosted virtual applications, as well as, of course, container-based microservices. But in the cloud, beyond the application space, as you know, people are looking for virtual infrastructure, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, etc. And this data does not include the software as a service delivered third-party applications as well. So there's quite a long list. On cloud spending, a couple of messages here. We see a continued trend, about 30% of budgets on public or private cloud-related services, with a compound annual growth rate of about 10%. We also see those with larger investments in cloud growing faster, so that's a positive kind of a magnet sign. Needless to say, or perhaps not needless to say, but just so you know, higher spending aligns with company size, and higher percentage of spending aligns with company size more significantly. For instance, 33% of the companies with more than 10,000 employees are spending more than 60% of their budget on cloud services. And next, what we'll see in the next slide is success. Cloud migration overall, although it's not a done deal, as we'll also talk about, generally aligns with a move towards success, a more progressive IT overall. You can see here the success we're talking about is optimizing IT for financial performance in this case, right? Running IT as a business, that includes delivering value, that includes optimizing value, and includes cost effectiveness overall. So you can see the dark blue is extremely successful, green is just very or successful, and the orange is not so much in optimizing IT for financial performance. And you can look down and see if you've got 61 to 100% of your budget targeting cloud services in some way, internal, external, whatever, the blue really wins, whereas if you're barely spending on cloud, you see we're not all that effective in optimizing IT for financial performance. So why are people doing all this? And there are a number of reasons. They're not all here, but let's start with the most pronounced. Number one, in terms of highest ranking, was increased flexibility, people, and agility. That versatility also leads to cost savings in various ways and an enablement to spend less on CapEx. I just don't have to buy all that much, but I want to focus on my operational efficiency, which is a key area of interest and growth for cloud. 4 and 5 you might call political. That is to say, we're getting pushed there to some degree from our senior management in IT. And then 5 is a line of business push. Okay, we want to see IT move to cloud. We hear it's good. We think it's good. You should do it. So here's some interesting data. I know this is one of the many eye charts you'll see, or one of the few eye charts, I think, actually. This is also brand new data from brand new research that we've just really surfaced last week. But DevOps is another incentive, that sense of speed and move to cloud. And if you look at this at the top, what was driving your enterprise to sort of move towards a more automated, progressive DevOps direction? And cloud is right at the top, coping with or optimizing, an interesting combination. Cloud is a factor. Cloud opportunities. Then you'll see speed right below that, speed in updating applications. If you jump down to 36%, you'll see speed in delivering new applications. And operational efficiencies, so important, tied right away with speed up there. Then you see down below, if you want to look down, sort of 29%, the focus on business value, superior customer sat, business process optimization, skipping down one, customer satisfaction, again, this one internal versus external, and improved employee productivity, revenue growth, etc. So all this message is really reinforcing, if you look at that top bar, all those things play to that larger message. Now here are a couple of quotes, and what's interesting about these quotes and why I want to pick them is I want to emphasize the fact that cloud migration is not a done deal yet. It's still very much an evolving story. And this is one case, an international bank conversation is this year, very recent. Here's what they're saying. We've got a distributed global infrastructure, and we care about availability and performance. Right now, our mainframe is still our bread and butter, but we're moving more applications and services to the cloud. So this is early on. This is still not 100%. This is far not a story of migration over. And here's another one. Including cloud as the near-term future direction. We're not there yet. We can only discover all of our core infrastructure, but not really cloud yet. They're not really discovering cloud yet. It's on the roadmap. They have a partnership with Google, interestingly enough, not Azure or AWS. And yet they have a cloud-first strategy as new business services and new apps require new releases more frequently. So DevOps is part of that story. and that's a large European retail enabler. And now I'd like to turn conversation to Will.
Hi everyone, thanks Dennis. Thanks for the marathon start. So it's apparent from your research that the urgency to move to the cloud is continuing to increase. The IT landscape is continuing to become ever more diverse and complicated to manage. I think we talked in a previous webinar about how many tools businesses use to ensure they have a complete picture of their assets, and in some cases it's 10. And we're continuing to see cloud services compound this again as these cloud projects progress. It's a continuing effort, not an end. That's a bit of a theme throughout here, I think. We talked about accountability challenges before as well, but they're really becoming real now. We hear cloud shock, it's a side effect of both the race to the cloud and some of those hidden expenditures that people having easy access to infrastructure as a service and subscription services gives lines of business as well as the ability to easily expense services that subsequently lead to unpleasant shock when the bills arrive, or when you look at the cost enumerated across an entire business. During or after transformation projects, this is now starting to become a sort of chilling reality. We kind of knew it was there before. And we're hearing this a lot, that those who are ultimately accountable for those expenditures are now facing literally huge challenges in identifying exactly where the money's being spent. No visibility. And we'll talk more about that later in future slides. The inventory is continuing to change, and we've talked about that sort of foundation and bedrock of an inventory. And it is a complex mix of physical, virtual, on-premise, off-premise, cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and the list goes on. Plus those subscription services which kind of wrap around that. It's a huge headache. It's a massive cobweb, and we're all rushing to get there. So as that race continues, we really need to make sure we have tools in place to allow us to view the complete picture. I think that's absolutely key. So to describe our customer experiences, Asset Vision affords them the ability to look at this complex estate across this diverse range of technologies in a single place. Using an equally diverse set of probes and technology, we sort of query these disparate data sources and IT assets to bring it together in, and here we go, in a single pane of glass. And we'll talk a little later about augmenting those systems with their own business data, which helps to make the intangible, often invisible estate something could be reported on centrally. Going a step further and adding another dimension with client-based web application usage information, there's the additional, making sure that we quantify use of that zero footprint stuff. I think, we shouldn't forget that intangible stuff. So back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Will. That was great. And we'll have a chance to go back and forth as we go through here, weighing different, or parallel views, I should say. So let's look at cloud challenges. We looked at reasons to go, the dimensions to go, what you want. A little more, as Will started to set the stage here, on cloud challenges. One thing that is very clear, if you're trying to do basic asset and audit processes and you're used to legacy infrastructure, you may need some different capabilities. This is dramatic in a couple of ways. You can see that 61% found that they were either significantly or radically impacted in their asset and audit processes by move to cloud. Only 6% were not impacted at all, which is pretty striking. And even perhaps more striking, the fact that when we correlated this with success, once again, in optimizing IT for financial performance, those who were most radically impacted were the most effective. That is to say, you want to move to cloud, it's time to make some changes if you haven't done the preparation already. So Before I go into this list of changes, I'd like to start with a parallel conversation, which is the move to public cloud isn't all one way. In some other recent research, a couple of years ago actually, what we saw was this. 57% of our respondents were adding public cloud providers. So that sounds what people would normally do. 25% are switching. I had X, I'm going to Y. 17% are in the process of eliminating a current provider without immediately switching. So it isn't all a one-way street, and cloud is not simply the endpoint for a journey. It requires a lot of insight in terms of what's out there and how to optimize, as we've been talking. When we looked at this data and we looked at the 17%, we're going away, we're not coming back to this one anyway. Reasons for leaving. Number one was security concerns. They felt, even though cloud is supposed to be more secure, that the process of living in a divided environment was threatening. High cost. That might sound quite counterintuitive, but if you can't measure what you're doing in the cloud, you could actually be spending more money less effectively, and we'll see more on that. Compliance issues, once again, that divided space creating challenges. And complexity, which is the other side of that same coin. Difficulty in moving applications as a whole. Many applications reside in more than one server and more than one environment, needless to say. Data could reside in-house, etc. So the understanding all those dependencies and moving that effectively was another reason that people said, you know, it's just too much. And then lack of support from the cloud service provider. They felt like, you know, they're out there trying to make a dollar. They're not helping us win our game here. So all those things can play, and yet they can all be circumvented with the right investments. Here's a list. We've looked at the top one already with the prior slide. Cloud has made asset management more challenging. Then here are these other areas of parallel challenges that you heard sort of in that last comment on the 17%. We've got to justify our costs. We have to show value more clearly. The business says you should move to cloud. You should be more cost effective. What does that actually look like? Requiring higher levels of automation. You've got speed, you've got a vMotion, and you've got any number of microservices running lickety-split in terms of new apps coming down the road. You need higher levels of automation. And that comes with shortening review cycles for managing change, pushing us as well to spend more attention on security as an integrated story with operations. Here SecOps means integrated security with operations. And cloud's changing how we're organized. We'll look at that a little more in depth as we go. But underneath the that cost story, cloud sprawl, right? Uncontrolled proliferation. Too much data, too much stuff going on, changing too quickly. We can't even see how it's moving and how it's affecting us. So that's a key area. That also argues that two other things I'll add: siloed versus cross-domain tools and insights. You need cross-domain insights above all if you're going to move to cloud. And then finally, shadow IT disruptions. With cloud, you can get that sort of, let's move from the business side. Let's not have a cohesive view. We're all in for ourselves. We can just take from the cloud. Well, 70% of our respondents found that process somewhat or significantly disruptive to overall IT efficiency. Okay. Just two more quotes here, and this is a little more on the moving ahead. We're actually back to that retail enabler. Cloud's becoming more and more important as they've moved, all right? They're already moving more into cloud. So many digital services directly to our end customers, including stores and online shops. Cloud becomes a pervasive way, reaching geographically and globally to all these different environments. But when every minute is money, everything has to be optimized. And as we shift to cloud, that really means better analysis, better awareness. That expectation for optimization, which isn't always so easy. And this, I think, makes a very straightforward story. Moving to cloud. We've been mostly private cloud. We're moving more to public cloud. But how do we do control when scaling is elastic? Well, this last sentence says it all. How do we control everything when scaling is elastic and we can't put an agent on every box? And then again, we'll talk about tools and discovery, usage, dependency insights, and Will can step us forward with some answers to that very question.
Thanks, Dennis. So yeah, as you've described, they're huge challenges, and cost is a major factor. And you know, it's funny. You know, at the beginning of this journey, we hear that during the design phases, it often seems like, yeah, you know, we're going to save, you know, $1 billion a nanosecond. You know, it's going to be immediate and significant cost reduction. Due to the nature of the journey itself, right, which is interesting because, you know, you're going to be running up services and hosting them at the same time, and so there's going to be some cost in the journey. And as you've discussed, the elastic capabilities, it's never quite that simple. It's never quite like it's just going to move to the cloud and we're going to save money. I think it's important to mention some positives though, because we are seeing our customers leveraging the rapid deployment, flexibility, enabling lines of business to flex themselves more easily. That's the whole point, right? Agility and flexibility is that great enabler. And although it comes at a cost, it would be impossible to scale sort of traditional compute without huge expenditure. You know, just putting another server in a rack, just the time and cost is huge. And as you mentioned in your previous slides, there's not just simple compute products in play. You know, we're seeing, you know, people are talking about hosted VMware, for example. So entire virtual estates are moving, literally. We're just going to put that in the cloud now. Software as a service we've discussed numerous times. Applications consolidated or homogenized, containers and microservices. So, you know, this isn't just computers in the sky anymore. You know. And my slide says data. And we all talk, we've heard of, you know, BigQuery and all the others. You know. Cloud-based data services far exceed the performance and flexibility of an on-premise system. But of course, they're charged in a very different way. And last but by no means least, workstations. So desktop as a service is rapidly gaining ground too. And I can see this being a really big thing over the next while. And all I'll say there is watch this space, all right? So our customers find that the tools we provide in the Asset Vision Intelligence platform, those tools that we use to scan and monitor the on-premise estate remains able to extend into the cloud estate. And that can be, you know, compute performance, that could be talking to APIs, that could be interacting with databases. And, you know, we're actively reviewing and developing new cloud-based capabilities as our customers demand. It's important not only to monitor what cloud products cost on the price list. Now, this is key, and we'll talk about this a bit later, but most importantly, what they actually cost from a billing perspective. You know, I know that thing costs £1 a minute or, you know, £1 a second. It's actually going to cost me at the end of the month. So it's the only true way to identify the cost is to look at the billing data. And we'll come back to that. And back to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Will. So now we'll dive right into and we'll set the stage beautifully on technology requirements, discovery and inventory, dependency mapping, and understanding costs, which is very usage related. So we've already looked at how big cloud spenders are evolving, and if they grow more, they tend to be more effective and invest more in cloud. Those with 60% of budget or more are also progressive in a couple of ways, and this is just a few examples. They have more strategic priorities for optimizing IT in terms of value and cost and performance. They're already further along in cloud. They already see that as part of what they're doing. They tend to have more inventory and discovery tools, which can be a mixed blessing, but they take it more seriously. And they're spending more time reconciling data, and we'll talk about that shortly. Not an ideal situation, but once again, They take inventory and discovery very seriously. And in many cases, they have a configuration management database or a configuration management system or some form of dependency mapping, discovery and dependency mapping or app dependency mapping, and more automation technologies. And all these foundations, and I should be doing some research on that whole continuum of CMS and DDM and CMDB as it's evolving, we're seeing not that these investments are gone and passé, but that they are becoming increasingly important in certain areas, including, just by the way, adoption of AI ops and other analytic technologies, as well as automation. So effective inventory and discovery, pretty key to just about everything. And this list is deliberately a bit random. Even what's in black is probably bold is what's most important, perhaps. But you can see, quickly going through this, you're assimilating cloud. You need to see what's there. Asset, you need to see what's there. CMDB or CMS dies if inventory and discovery isn't what it needs to be. Change management can't be done if you can't discover and see what's there. Nor can you do release management for DevOps, nor can you do capacity planning. Security and compliance becomes a myth if you can't understand what you've got. Managing application and infrastructure performance across cloud, hybrid, within cloud, whatever, also cannot be done if you can't see what you've got. You can't minimize redundancies, which is so important when you've got VM, sprawl in cloud, VM sprawl, whatever. IT governance and ownership becomes, again, something of a myth because you can't govern what you can't see, and you can't see what you've got. Optimizing end user experience depends on all these insights, and core IT financial planning also depends on them as well. Now, we've talked about too many tool sets can be a problem just as they can be a blessing. Taking them seriously is great. On the other hand, on average, we see respondents using 11 or more different discovery or inventory tools, even primarily just focused on the asset side, let alone purely on performance or security side. When we ask that question from different dimensions, we tend to get 10 to 11 depending on use case. And you can see 21% had 20 or more, again, primarily looking at asset inventory. Larger corporations spread out tend to be the most doing that higher number. An average of 15 hours a week. That was an average, standard. We've got all these different discovery and inventory tools. We've got to reconcile them. That's a lot of OpEx expense. And so what are they struggling with? Too many data sources, time loss in data reconciliation, some of the data is unactionable, and lack of resources to act upon it. Not even knowing necessarily which tool is relevant or accurate in which context. Sometimes it gets political. So that's another area of growth and change in cloud. We need to boost that top blue bar that says real time because cloud is very much a real-time story. You certainly need to be able to have what's current and relevant in a very timely manner. And so if you're just looking at weekly or multiple times per month as per the bottom or monthly, discovery is no longer going to be very helpful in a hybrid cloud environment with that, or multi-cloud for that matter. So,
great.
Will, I'd like to turn it back to you.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, great point. You know, effective inventory, accurate topology, starting with that single source of truth, you know, is always key. You know, and inventory against a myriad of technologies, which makes up an estate, living physical, virtual, multi-cloud, it's a serious challenge. And if we're moving, you know, we've got to maintain that as we move, because we don't want to just say, well, that's what it did look like. I'm not sure what it looks like now. We have to monitor that as we go. And I know I'll be using it again, that single pane of glass that Asset Vision provides across those multiple technologies. It provides that intelligence to support any transformation project, whether you're at the beginning, the end, is there an end, you know, there's going to be an evolution, whatever. I think together with that full identification of traditionally installed usage of SaaS software, analysis of server communications, what's talking to what, which computers are talking to which computers, layered with the utilization. So how are the CPUs, being loaded and so on, gives you incredibly powerful metrics. Monitoring this during transition is key, keeping things on track and optimizing as you go. And the simple examples of I've moved this to the cloud and it's now sitting there with literally not even touching the CPU 24 hours a day. Well, did that thing need to move? How can I justify the cost of that thing? Perhaps I need to change it. It's maintaining that analysis. I think it's still key to identify what the end user is doing. And as I'm sure you've heard before if you've spoken to me, Asset Vision provides what's been termed as forensic usage data, basically a handful of incredible useful data points, sometimes dubbed my favourite five, who is using what, from where, and how intensely. So Will is using PowerPoint from his laptop for about 30 minutes, about 20 keystrokes. And this could be the front end to a service you've just moved to the cloud. It could be something, what if it's not being used? You've moved all this, you're spending all this money, and actually the end users aren't interacting with that tool at all. And of course, we can apply that to like a web-based, SaaS application, which would be typical in the cloud. Whether it be ServiceNow or an in-house hosted application, Will is using G Suite from his laptop for about 30 minutes. It's exactly the same, and it gives our customers a really clear picture of that changing, visible, invisible, hardware, software, how it's being used and how that transformation is progressing. And really that provides that key data into the KPIs, how are we doing in the cloud? Why is it costing us this? Have we spent the right money? I think that's really key. So back to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Will. Again, that cohesion, that bringing it all together in a relevant and cohesive and actually fairly direct and simple way in some ways, one of the things I love about Asset Vision. We're going to look at the dependency needs. Understanding where the application resides is something that we've been looking at for a long time. And of course, a lot of people associate it with APM, and it's already much a part of app performance management, is needless to say. But you need those views to bring those views together with understanding about infrastructure and license and usage, all need to come together to really make it work. By understanding overall that a rich stack-related insight into where apps and infrastructure come together is central to cloud, assuming you can do it in public as well as private and legacy environments. And we're going to look at just a couple of examples here. Application workload migration. You need to understand your interdependencies before you begin to migrate your application. Then what about on the top right, service impact? You're making a change, then what happens? You want to be able to have that if-then insight by looking at those interdependencies. Compliance and risk assessment and security is fundamental. Vulnerability, if you cannot understand how apps infrastructure are coming together, where they're changing, where they're not. Software license management, ditto, because you may have irrelevant servers or you may have vulnerable servers because of license issues. You need to keep those current. A couple of other points. What about understanding the data center you've got? You need to do that with dependencies in mind before you even begin to move to cloud. As you provision as you continue to provision new environments, then you need consistent updates. That it's not a one-size-fits-all. It requires continual insight, so it's an ongoing process and needs to go continually throughout the migration. And last, I'll just mention something I heard in somebody standing up and cheering for dependency mapping. He called no server left behind. Cloud makes it even more critical so you can see what's used, unused, what's not registered, etc. You really can manage and optimize. So just a little more dimensionality on interdependencies. They can come in flavors, infrastructure to app, endpoint to infrastructure, infrastructure to infrastructure. These are coming from different requirements, and different tool sets may be stronger in any one of them. To bring them all together in the way we describe, you want to have those dimensions that also look at asset and usage for cloud optimization. And indeed, you have different types of sources. You could look at cost-driven, you could look at change-driven tools, you can look at dashboards, and then you could have a tool that has some analysis within it, bringing it together, as well as talking about in a consistent framework. And other use cases, obviously performance and availability, both in terms of applications and business services, data center consolidation, and security and vulnerability assessments. By the way, when we looked at requirements for discovery and dependency mapping, we saw that only 3% had no plans as they moved to cloud. And Will, it's time for you again.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. So it's one of my favorite slides. So flashlight in the basement. So dependency mapping is fabulous. I love it. I love this data. And I often liken it to, those may have heard this before, it's like using a flashlight in a darkened basement of an IT estate, right? So, and I'll set the scene. So imagine using asset vision dependency mapping as a flashlight to shine across the basement and identify, boxes in the dark, so computers, servers, software. And once we've found a box, we're like, right, we know what that is, and we see sort of threads reaching out into the dark from the components in that box. And we can then follow them with our flashlight to find other boxes and components with their own threads. And this helps to sort of build up that complex spider web of interconnectivity in the darkness. And I love that picture. Imagining different components, whether it be SQL Server or an Apache web server, having sort of different color streams helps to really build out on that visualization. So this data is, of course, incredibly powerful to support a move to the cloud. What to move, what its dependencies are, what to buy or consolidate. However, it retains its usefulness during the transition. And even when a project is complete, and we keep talking complete, it's an evolution. There could be identifying cross-network or use of expensive bandwidth is a great use case if it's on-premise. But actually in the cloud, it's incredibly important because you could be paying for some very expensive bandwidth. You might be talking back to your data center because you forgot to move a key component, and that can blow costs. So identifying them quickly is key. Another use case, I think still relevant, is and you'll like this, to identify cross-business use of cloud-hosted applications. So if you imagine a service set up and paid for by one line of business being consumed by other lines of business, that could make for really interesting chargeback reports or whatever you call them. So I think that's another key use case. But the most important thing is analysis of this data, whether it be dependence or even performance metrics over time, is incredibly powerful. Watching for trends, identifying future redundant services, whose load is increasing, provides you that incredible intelligence. And finally, that near real-time sense of truth. What really happens if I switch this off is still an applicable use case. So back to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, it is. Dependency mapping is so key. I can bring so many things together. So when we look at understanding costs, you could flash that is really understanding usage. And I think what's interesting here, this question was asked, okay, what is most critical for the move to cloud in general, albeit in terms of optimizing IT for value and performance and cost? And to go through 1 through 8, everything has to do with usage very directly, with the exception of number 3, and they're ranked in terms of priority, which was understanding performance issues with cloud. So we're looking at security and compliance issues for audits. Well, if you want to do audits, you need to understand usage. Understanding software and application usage across lines of business, as Will described. Understanding performance. Optimizing mixed software as a service and on-premise application usage. So critical as you move to cloud. But whether you're hosting yourself or you're leveraging third-party, how is it being divided and what's going on? The basic software license audits, optimizing public cloud for cost and value more broadly, lifecycle asset and change management, also usage-driven in many respects, and gaining insights into spending and usage across public and private cloud environments as an entirety, including not just limited to apps, infrastructure, the whole deal. Usage, very high at the top there. Some other key technology requirements, just very briefly, project management is important. A self-service portal, as you're going to bring cloud services into the game at home, you need to have the portal ready to do that. We talked about automation, and you need persona-driven, persona-aware reporting, whether it's domain-specific, cross-domain, and we're going to look at some of the roles soon, or non-IT business stakeholders. And you want to have, whether you have a CMDB or a CMS, or at least want to be able to have good configuration data that's current, that can be automated, that can be kept current. Whether you call it a CMDB, CMS or not, it's important. Now let's look at some process and organizational recommendations. So this is our persona group, and it could be changing a little bit. This was a year or two old. We could have added site reliability engineers, for instance, as a unique kind of DevOps story. But if you look across this list, so infrastructure plays a key role, number one at 41%. And if you skip down to 34%, you see capacity planning and optimization. That's what I call on that infrastructure side. Then you skip down to 29%, you'll see infrastructure architecture. So infrastructure in various flavors, various roles. Service level management is key, both for what you do and how you manage your cloud service provider. You skip down to the third, application performance, and then drop to the 35% to the second one, app development. So application is also key. And then you get an array, desktop, service, asset change, DevOps, and vendor-specific management. And by the way, the delta is not all that great, right? 41% in infrastructure services, asset management is financial planning at 29%. The average was respondent indicated of almost 4.5 different roles were involved in these skill groups. And optimizing the delivery of business services actually favored more the performance. So it's actually struck by how high asset management scored on this particular list. So what do you do? It's going to vary. There's not a generic answer, as I like to say, because there's not a generic IT organization. But you can see the various flavors. Cloud is simply separate, or cloud is integrated into the broader approach, wholly integrated. Or internal cloud is integrated, but public cloud, we do it separately. Or on the negative side, that shadow IT driving a wedge, and not all shadow IT has to be bad, but it can be brought in line with the right technology so that its shadow isn't as dark. So that is the other flavor. So look at the organizational changes we've seen. The first three were actually tied. I'll just give you they were tied at 40% in terms of what people saw as they had to rank their top couple. Moved to a more cross-domain, very important to have that cross-domain insight, you need cross-domain tools. Became more engaged with IT's business clients, and we evaluated how we work with service providers because that relationship becomes a lot more intimate, a lot more dependencies, a lot more dynamic. Interesting if you look at 4 and you look at 6. Accelerated the adoption of ITIL or best practices in the IT infrastructure library. 6 is, 4 and 7, we moved away from the IT infrastructure library and best practices. So overall, from our research, we are seeing best practices being a winning idea. ITIL 4 is coming up with more automation. So the IT infrastructure library, still relevant, still there, still important. 5, operations took back control. And that's rather than have cloud as a separate group, operations took back control. And then the 2 and 6 are the other flip. More involved with business clients, less engaged. So what's happening in 6 and 7 are more the negatives, kind of the panicked or scared IT organization, running away from best practices and afraid to deal with or trying to avoid, or just simply a bigger walls evolve between us and our business clients. Why? Because clouds put too many challenges on us. We can't really explain it all. And Will, up to you now.
Thanks, Dennis. So many sort of key points in what you've been talking about. Just to go back a slide or two, I do feel for shadow IT. You know, we'll have to find it a new name. But back to the matter at hand. So from a tooling perspective, technology obviously empowers the business. But often trying to look at the technical data we're collecting and mapping that back to the business is a real challenge, right? So, and I mentioned this right at the beginning slide, that all of our customers augment their technical automated data, so the discovery and the inventory, with line of business information, usually by some kind of direct integration, whether it be Active Directory or other purchase data, perhaps ownership data, or some other data source that allows, or other sources that allow you to connect the technical to the business. This then, of course, provides a view of that technical with a new light, not flashlight, just a light. Business services mapped to technical services, machine usage, expenses mapped to ownership, and that really lights the way. So everything starts to make sense that, as we're transitioning to the cloud, we talked about, well, we know that this service isn't performing as well as it should do, or we need to, it's costing money. Being able to tile this back is so key. And we mentioned the billing problem several times throughout all of this. And as suggested, this is key due to it being exactly what you're paying for. It's not what I'm buying. So product X costs me £10 a minute. It's exactly what you're paying for. So how much of those 10 minutes did I use this month? So the problem is really the bills, as I understand it, and this is what our customers are telling us, that often they're like a telephone bill with either not enough information or way too much. So either your bill is this much, £315,000 or something, or it's a huge itemized list of every single transaction, which is completely impossible to pass. So at Scalable, we're excited to talk about developing a new capability to allow customers to upload their bills. They get processed, flattened, and categorized into simple spend by cloud product type. Now, if we align that with the augmented business data, this is incredibly powerful. And we're actively working with our customers to ensure this continues to provide value, and we continue to deliver the next evolution of this. So this is really brand new for us, but it's absolutely key. And the important thing is, as we say, analysing what it's actually costing us. So in summary, as you can imagine, that marriage of line of business information with actual tangible and readable, not that huge phone bill, billing data is key to understanding this conundrum and understanding giving visibility to the business, I think, is really key. Back to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Will. We're going to both be wrapping up, getting ready for your questions on the next section. So I'd like to wrap up with some recommendations for going forward. Executive leadership is important because we're dealing with cross-domain, multiple stakeholders. We want leadership to help drive that. We see constant research showing that. And also executive leadership helps to promote better adoption of automation and analytics and other technologies that can change the game and processes for IT. Overlay teams that are focused on bringing stakeholders together that may not have worked together as much in the past. We often see a cloud team initially, but then we see broader groups like operations and ITSM as unifiers, unique DevOps teams, very important. SecOps, in this case, again, being security plus operations, not security operations separately, all key. Communication is so important. When we've done consulting, a lot of our consulting is really to help the IT organization understand persona perspectives and how they are communicating or not. Evaluating technologies based on your unique requirements. Understanding your specific needs is so important versus just looking at some kind of a chart that says here's the winner and here's the loser. You need to understand your requirements. Invest in project management so you can supervise the process. You want metrics. If you're going to measure what you're doing, you need metrics to help define what's going on. That includes service level agreements relevant to you and your cloud provider, so you can help sort of shepherd your cloud provider to doing what you want the provider to do for you with agreements. It's a bi-directional conversation, needless to say. You want regular and consistent audits, so important, and a big focus for our conversation so far. We talked about the VM instances, microservice, etc., application and infrastructure, and security and compliance, all need to come together in a cohesive way. And you need to have policies and automation to streamline what you're doing, to evolve and streamline what you're doing. And the end game, my last slide, really it's a simple statement. Despite the phrase journey to the cloud, I don't think going to the cloud in itself should be your end game. The cloud is a resource. You want to optimize it. You want to leverage it to the max. You want to evolve it as you evolve, and you want to know why you're doing it. So it's an enabler. You want the flexibility of cloud, the versatility, and you want cost optimization. But you will, in the end, want to continue to do what's right for you. And that means knowing what you've got, knowing why you're doing it, and knowing what the outcome should be for yourself. It's an ongoing process, but do what's right for you. And Will?
Thanks, Dennis. And really, my summary slide says exactly the same. That, you know, this tells the story whether it be a new migration, an ongoing project, or analysis after the fact, right? It starts with the move to the cloud type actions, seek out something to help them do just that, transactionally. But I think we'll all agree that it's not the end of the story, and the tools that will support you in just that transition are just too narrow. Quite simply, part of our estate is changing and continuing to change, and we're going to need to continue to analyse and evaluate that. And after that move, the bedrock hasn't become new bedrock, it's become fluid, elastic, and therefore this ongoing independent central monitoring, analyses, build processing is absolutely critical. You know, you mustn't throw out your previous tools, as it's highly likely that part of your existing infrastructure will remain, as not everything can or will move. Some things will move back. We know that's going to happen. And as I suggested much earlier, this is the present and the future. You know, things can change fast, and cloud services accelerate that. As a service, subscription support responds to business need, innovation. Again, poor shadow IT, you know, that shadow or perhaps invisible IT, it really is a true enabler, as you said in your past slide. You know, our most pioneering, I don't know, I think, you know, staff, departments and businesses, it's definitely worth embracing rather than suppressing. Okay? However, and as again you said, Dennis, that central monitoring, understanding and analysis is key to supporting business approval, engagement, lack of duplication, identifying cost savings, and overall keeping the flashlight on in the basement or in fact cloud, I suppose. So back to you, Dennis. Or in fact, over to you, Raleigh.
I think we're ready for Raleigh. Raleigh?
Yes. Thank you, Will and Dennis. You can log your questions now. Before you do so, I wanted to invite everyone to learn more about Scalable by checking out their website and by checking up on the follow-up email that will go out later today. So let's go ahead and jump into the questions. The first one, Dennis, I'll direct to you. Will, if you have any feedback, feel free to add it. Dennis, could you share some insights on how cloud requires higher level of automation?
Sure. And the answer is, you know, many different dimensions. So number one, you've got vMotion, you've got sprawl in the cloud, very dynamic environment. You want to be able to understand and a lot of the cloud service providers have some basic tools in terms of overseeing, what's going on, but you need to marry those with your own capabilities to understand where your costs are, what's changing, and why it's changing. The cloud is also accelerating processes. It's accelerating DevOps. There's pretty much a one-to-one equation with move to cloud, accelerating DevOps. It means faster release cycles, faster configuration automation to make things work in that cloud environment. Because things are dynamic and changes can impact performance, you need more automated tools to look at root cause analysis as well. You need workflow to promote better dialogue across domain, because cloud is very cross-domain. And you need automation to support your service level agreement requirements so that you can see where things are going with your service provider in a very accurate, again, dynamic context. So, cloud has many dimensions. You can scratch through public, in terms of a virtual server. You get into containers, you get into microservices, you get into huge dynamic requirements once you look at that full spectrum of cloud and all the complexities that arise from all the various dimensions of cloud. Will, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think you've covered it, Dennis. Sorry.
Yep. Good.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Jumping over to you, Will, you mentioned augmenting asset vision with business data. What kind of data sources do you typically consume, and is there a specific format you support?
Good question. So mine won't be nearly as long as an answer as Dennis's, but it can be all manner of data. So a standard feed we have is Active Directory, which is your basic sort of easy out of the box. But we can consume anything, via MS SQL, so we can query data directly, or even Oracle, or flat files. And recently we've added a new OData layer, which increases the options so people can actually push data into us directly, or query it in their BI tools if they wish.
Great, thank you. And Will, let's take one more question before we wrap up today's event. Talking of hybrid multi-cloud estates inside the Scalable product, what providers do you support?
Yeah, another good question and another really easy one. So today we support AWS. We started there because we're an AWS customer ourselves, Azure and Google Cloud Platform. And we'll really be driven by our customers, prospects in the market for what we're going to do next, whichever provider. But for today, just those three is where we're at.
Great, thank you for that information. Thank you, Dennis and Will, for taking those questions, and I wanted to thank our audience for joining us today. You will be receiving a follow-up email later today. I hope you will check that out, and I hope that we'll see you at a future EMA Research webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.